That morning, my phone lit up and my stomach dropped. By dinner, my mother slid me a $2 scratch-off like I was a punchline. I scratched it in dead silence, thinking it was nothing, and learning it was everything. My name is Harper Bennett. My phone lit up in the dark cabin of my sedan, flooding everything with harsh white glare. Fraud alert. A charge of $18,500. Norwegian Cruise Line. I stared at the glowing letters. The engine hummed quietly beneath me, but the sound felt miles away. My breath plumed in the cold air. $18,500. That was not a random number. That was my exact house down payment. Every single penny I had scraped together over the last 3 years. I had worked double shifts. I had skipped lunches. I had lived on clearance aisle soup and instant coffee. I was supposed to wire that money to the escrow account tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. Now, it was gone. My fingers felt numb. It was not from the freezing winter air seeping through the cracks of my old car. It was the ice-cold realization of betrayal. I opened my banking application. The loading wheel spun for 3 agonizing seconds. The balance appeared. $0.12. 12 cents. They had not taken it all at once. A single large transaction would have frozen the account immediately. I scrolled through the transaction history. I saw a string of smaller charges. $2,000 here, $3,500 there, $1,900. They were carefully split up over the last 48 hours to bypass the automated security triggers. This was not a mistake. This was calculated. This was deliberate. Someone knew exactly how to drain the account without tripping the alarms until the very end. And I knew exactly who had my routing numbers. My phone buzzed again in my palm. A notification from the family group chat popped up. A high-resolution picture loaded on the screen. It was a glossy promotional brochure for a Royal Suite baby cruise. My older sister, Delaney, had sent it. The caption followed a second later. Family spoils me so much. She added a champagne glass emoji, a little digital toast to my stolen future. I looked down at the passenger seat. Lying there on the cracked leather was a $2 scratch-off lottery ticket. My mother, Marilyn, had tossed it to me across the dining table just hours ago. Better than nothing, she had said. She had waved her hand dismissively, turning her attention back to Delaney's pregnancy cravings. She had tossed it like I was a stray dog begging for scraps at their feast, like I was an outsider looking in through a frosted window. The parking lot was desolate and freezing. Ice crusted the edges of my windshield, creeping inward like frozen claws. I reached into the cup holder and picked up a quarter. I picked up the cheap cardboard ticket. I scraped the silver foil off the play area. The sound was loud in the quiet car. Scrape, scrape, scrape. My heart pounded against my ribs. It sounded like a heavy fist knocking on a thick wooden door, a steady, demanding rhythm. The numbers revealed themselves one by one. I dusted off the remaining silver flakes with my thumb. $100 million. I stopped breathing. The air trapped in my lungs felt like shattered glass. I stared at the cardboard. I read the zeros again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 digits total. I did not smile. I did not laugh. I did not scream in triumph. Joy was a luxury I had never been allowed to afford. My first instinct, honed by 20 years of emotional survival in the Bennett household, kicked in immediately. Safety. Hide the asset. Protect the perimeter. If they knew about this, they would not just take $18,000. They would take my blood. They would take my marrow. They would drain me until I was a hollow shell. And then they would complain that I did not leave enough for a tip. I reached out and turned the ignition key backward. The engine died. The heater cut out instantly. The brutal New Hampshire winter began to claim the inside of the car. I needed the cold. I needed to stay sharp. I did not call my best friend. I did not call the police to report the stolen $18,500. Not yet. I opened a private browser tab on my phone. The screen cast a blue glow over my face. My thumbs typed quickly and quietly. Anonymous lottery claim laws. How to set up a blind trust. Shielding assets from immediate family members. limited liability company formation for lottery winners. I read through dense legal paragraphs. I absorbed the information like a sponge. The panic that had gripped my chest just 5 minutes ago began to recede. It was replaced by something else, something cold, sharp, and entirely new: control. For my entire life, I had been the designated victim, the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who absorbed the financial blows so the rest of them could pretend they were affluent. They had just stolen my escape route. They thought they had trapped me in their cycle of debt and obligation forever. They thought I would cry, yell, and eventually forgive them because we were blood. To understand how completely they underestimated me, you have to go back to the heat of the dining room, back to the smell of roasted chicken and the sound of clinking glasses. 4 hours earlier, the air in my parents' house had been thick with unspoken demands and false cheer. I had walked into that house hoping to quietly celebrate my impending freedom. I had walked out with a useless piece of cardboard and an empty bank account. They thought they had played the ultimate winning hand. They thought I was just a mechanism to fund their delusions, a stepping stone for Delaney, a safety net for my father, a compliant servant for my mother. I folded the winning ticket perfectly in half. I folded it again. I unzipped the side of my winter boot. I slipped the thick cardboard deep into the lining, right against my ankle. I zipped it back up. I pressed my foot down firmly onto the floorboard. I could feel the firm edge of $100 million pressing against my skin. It was the most grounding sensation I had ever experienced. My gaze shifted to the dark windshield. The snow was beginning to fall, dusting the hood of my car in white. I spoke to the empty car. My voice was completely flat. If they like seeing me as a tool, I will become a contract. The drive to Concord had been a white-knuckle crawl through an unplowed interstate. The snow in New Hampshire did not just fall, it attacked. It piled up on the shoulders of the road and turned the world into a blinding, freezing expanse of white. By the time I kicked my boots against the frozen concrete of my parents' front porch, my toes were completely numb. I pushed open the heavy oak door, bracing myself for the familiar, suffocating atmosphere of my childhood home. My boots left a gray sludge of road salt and melted snow on the entryway runner. Before I could even take my scarf off, the voice of my father, Gordon Bennett, barked from the living room. He did not look up from his digital tablet. "Do not track that dirt onto the hardwood. Harper, I just had those floors polished. Not a hello, not a question about the treacherous drive. Just an immediate directive, as if I were a careless delivery worker who had overstayed her welcome." I carefully unlaced my boots and stepped into my socks. My mother, Marilyn, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a decorative linen towel. She looked me up and down, her expression a mask of mild inconvenience. "Good. You made it. Wash the dishes to clear things up. The prep bowls are piling up in the sink, and I need the counter space for the dessert trays." I swallowed the sigh that threatened to escape my lips. At Blackridge Property Services, I was the operations manager. I oversaw logistics for 30 commercial buildings. I negotiated vendor contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. I handled burst water pipes at 2 o'clock in the morning and mitigated tenant disasters before they could spiral into lawsuits. I was a professional crisis manager. But the moment I crossed the threshold of the Bennett household, my title vanished. I was instantly demoted to the unpaid help. I walked into the living room. My older sister, Delaney, was holding court on the velvet sofa. She was 5 months pregnant and treating the condition like a royal decree that required round-the-clock worship from everyone in her vicinity. "I was reading this holistic wellness blog," Delaney announced, rubbing her perfectly round belly while ignoring my arrival entirely. "It says the baby needs to absorb negative ions from ocean energy to ensure a calm temperament. That is why this cruise is basically a medical necessity for the child." "Absolutely," my mother cooed, carrying a tray of expensive crab-stuffed mushrooms. "The sea air will do wonders for the baby's spiritual development." The whole room nodded in agreement. They beamed at her like she had just performed a miracle. My older brother, Spencer, was leaning against the stone mantel. swirling a glass of cheap bourbon he liked to pretend was top shelf. He wore a designer sweater bought with credit he did not have. He caught my eye and smirked, sensing an opportunity to perform for our parents. Hear that? Harper? Ocean Energy. Spencer took a slow sip of his drink. Maybe you should try it instead of hugging your money all day. You live like you are your own accountant. Seriously, when was the last time you bought a piece of clothing that was not on a clearance rack? You are practically a monk. The casual humiliation stung, but I was used to it. I bit my tongue hard enough to taste copper. I tried to pivot the conversation to something positive, to a milestone I had fought tooth and nail to achieve. I am saving for a reason, I said quietly, keeping my posture straight. I'm closing on the townhouse next week. The down payment is finally ready. I just have to wire the funds tomorrow morning. The room went dead silent. The proud smiles directed at Delaney vanished. My mother waved her hand in the air, dismissing the biggest achievement of my adult life like a pesky fly buzzing around her food. Oh, what do you need a house for right now? My mother scoffed. The real estate market is terrible for buyers. Besides, family is the real investment. We should be focusing on the new baby, not tying up cash in a mortgage you will struggle to pay. I looked at my father for a shred of support, but he was already nodding along with my mother. I was a selfish outsider for wanting a roof over my head. While Delaney was a saint for needing a luxury vacation, the dinner that followed was an exercise in endurance. The roast chicken was dry, and the conversation revolved entirely around Delaney's excursion itinerary. When the plates were finally cleared, my mother stood up and clapped her hands together with theatrical excitement. We have a little surprise for our mommy-to-be. She reached into a decorative bowl on the sideboard and handed Delaney a thick cream-colored envelope. Delaney tore it open with greedy fingers and squealed. It was a thick stack of $100 bills, bound with a paper band, for the onshore excursions and the premium spa package. My father said proudly, puffing out his chest. "Thank you," Delaney gushed, fanning her face with the cash. "The family spoils me so much." My mother then turned to me. Almost as an afterthought, she reached into her apron pocket and slid a brightly colored piece of cardboard across the tablecloth. It stopped right next to my water glass. It was a $2 scratch-off lottery ticket. "And for you," my mother said, offering a tight, patronizing smile. "Who knows? It might change your life. Better than nothing, right?" I looked down at the cheap, shiny paper, a $2 ticket, the ultimate symbol of their absolute disregard for my worth. I forced the corners of my mouth upward. I offered a polite, hollow smile. "Thank you." But as my fingers touched the cold cardboard, a jarring memory from 3 days ago suddenly snapped into place in my mind. My mother had stopped by my apartment unannounced. She claimed her phone was dead and she urgently needed to check an order confirmation from a home goods store. She had asked to borrow my phone. I had unlocked it and handed it to her without a second thought. She had taken it into my kitchen and stayed there for 20 solid minutes, claiming the internet connection was slow. The dinner officially wrapped up. As expected, the unspoken rule of the house dictated that I was assigned clearing duty. I stacked the heavy dessert plates and carried them into the kitchen. The room was warm and smelled of vanilla and roasted garlic, a stark contrast to the freezing knot of dread rapidly forming in my stomach. I set the plates down roughly near the stainless steel sink. Beside the wooden knife block, a pile of mail and loose papers sat haphazardly on the granite counter. As I reached for the dish soap, a small torn corner of a printed bank statement caught my eye. Underneath it was a crumpled yellow sticky note. I froze. I pushed the junk mail aside with a trembling index finger. Written on the yellow paper, in my mother's unmistakable, looping cursive handwriting, was my personal email address. Right beneath it, written with the exact same blue ink, was the complex, 12-character password I used for my primary banking recovery account. Sitting on the edge of a sagging mattress in a roadside motel I had checked into 45 minutes ago, the silence of the room felt heavier than the winter storm howling outside the single-pane window. The neon sign from the parking lot cast a sickly red glow across the cheap carpet. For 2 decades, a massive, invisible weight had dictated every single choice I ever made. It was the debt. When I was 7 years old, a severe respiratory infection had put me in the pediatric intensive care unit for 3 agonizing weeks. My father, Gordon, had sat me down on my 18th birthday and told me he had to liquidate his entire retirement fund and take out crushing secondary mortgages to keep my lungs pumping. He told me he sold his future to buy my breath. I spent the next 20 years paying for that breath. The guilt had been a permanent, choking collar around my neck. It was the sole reason I took every holiday overtime shift at Black Ridge Property Services. It was the reason I repaired my winter boots with industrial adhesive instead of buying new ones. It was the reason I skipped dental checkups and funneled 20% of every single paycheck directly into my parents' joint bank account. I believed I was making up for the financial ruin my childhood sickness had caused them. I believed it was my fundamental duty as a daughter to balance the cosmic scales. But the stolen $18,500 changed the lens through which I viewed my entire history. The narrative did not make sense anymore. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I picked up my phone. I scrolled past the family group chat, ignoring a new picture of Delaney's cruise itinerary, and found the contact for Aunt Tessa. She was my father's younger sister. She was the family outcast who had been uninvited from every Thanksgiving dinner for the last 12 years, because she refused to play along with my parents' carefully curated suburban image. She answered on the 5th ring. Her voice was thick with sleep, but instantly became sharp when she heard my tone. I did not waste time with pleasantries or apologies for the late hour. I asked her point blank about the hospital bills from 20 years ago. I asked her exactly how much my father had paid out of pocket to save my life. A heavy, jagged sigh crackled through the phone speaker. Tessa's words came out slow and deliberate, slicing cleanly through 20 years of carefully constructed deception. Your father did not go bankrupt because of your lungs. Harper, your medical bills were almost entirely covered by the state insurance program. Gordon took out high-interest loans from some very dangerous private lenders because he completely botched a speculative commercial real estate flip. He lost hundreds of thousands of dollars in a bad deal. When the lenders started threatening to break his legs, he used your hospital stay as the perfect, unquestionable shield. He used your sickness to manipulate the rest of the extended family into bailing him out, and he used it to keep you under his thumb forever. I stopped breathing. The dingy motel room spun for a fraction of a second. The foundational truth of my entire existence was a fabricated ghost story. The crushing debt I had carried on my shoulders since elementary school was nothing but a psychological leash. They had manufactured my guilt to guarantee a lifetime of blind compliance and a steady, unquestioning income stream. I had been funding the lifestyle of the very people who had forged my chains. I ended the call with Tessa and let the phone drop onto the cheap polyester bedspread. My mind raced back to the dining room table earlier that evening. I thought about the $2 scratch-off ticket my mother had tossed at me. It was never a quirky, harmless joke. It was a calculated message. It was their way of showing me my exact place in their hierarchy. Delaney got thousands of dollars for a luxury vacation because she was the golden child, the one who elevated their social status. I got $2 because, in their eyes, that was the absolute ceiling of my worth. I was just a utility. I was a plow horse, and you do not buy a plow horse expensive gifts. You just give it enough cheap hay to keep it pulling the heavy cart. A cold, mechanical calm washed over my entire body. The frantic desire for immediate, loud revenge faded away. It was quickly replaced by a much darker, sharper instinct before I could strike back, before I could even think about the 9-figure piece of cardboard hidden inside my winter boot. I had to sever their access to my life. I had to build an impenetrable fortress. I pulled my laptop from my leather bag and connected to the unsecured motel wireless network. I logged into my primary email account, the central hub for all my banking, work, and personal communications. I bypassed the overflowing inbox and went straight into the deep security archives. I filtered the search parameters for unrecognized login verifications and security alerts. Dozens of system-generated emails populated the screen. They dated back 3, 4, even 6 years. Notices of sign, ins from new browsers, alerts about password recovery attempts and changes to security questions. I had always dismissed them as annoying system glitches or accidental clicks from my own devices. I had been incredibly naive. They had not just stolen my money today, they had been quietly monitoring my financial growth for years. They had been watching my savings account balance rise month by month, patiently waiting for the exact moment the crop was fat enough to harvest. I navigated to the Active Device Management panel. This was the digital nerve center of my account, showing every single piece of hardware currently authorized to access my personal data. My eyes scanned the short list of approved electronics. There was my work computer, there was my personal cellular phone, and right below that, actively syncing my private data at that very moment, was a third device. The screen glowed with a name that turned the blood in my veins to absolute ice. Marilyn's iPad. I stared at the name glowing on the screen. Marilyn's iPad. The digital tether that had allowed my mother to quietly monitor my life, tracking my savings account like a farmer watching a crop ripen. I did not hesitate. I clicked the button to sever the connection. The device vanished from the list. Severing her access instantly, the panic was gone, replaced by a hyper-focused, clinical execution of tasks. I spent the next 2 hours systematically rebuilding the walls of my life. I changed every single password, abandoning anything remotely tied to my identity for random, complex strings of letters and symbols. I enabled biometric and secondary device authentication across all platforms. I wiped my old security questions. The name of my first pet and the street I grew up on were now replaced with nonsensical, fabricated answers. Most crucially, I obliterated the compromised recovery email address and established a completely new, heavily encrypted account. My digital footprint was now a locked vault. With the digital perimeter secured, I turned to the physical asset. I retrieved the winning ticket from the lining of my winter boot. My hands were perfectly steady. I slipped the cardboard rectangle into a heavy-duty, waterproof plastic bag I had packed for my toiletries. I placed it flat on the desk and used my phone to take high-resolution photographs of the front, the back, and a macro shot of the validation barcode. I uploaded these images directly to a newly created, encrypted cloud drive and then permanently deleted the photos from my local device storage. Hiding the physical ticket required thinking like prey trying to evade a predator. My parents would never search for anything that did not directly benefit them. I unzipped my canvas duffel bag and pulled out an unopened, brightly colored package of feminine hygiene products, using a small pocket knife. I carefully slit the bottom seam of the plastic wrapper. I slid the waterproof bag containing $100 million deep between the cotton pads, completely obscuring it from view, and sealed the bottom edge with a thin strip of clear tape. It was utterly mundane. It was invisible. At exactly 8 o'clock the next morning, the motel room was still freezing. I sat on the edge of the mattress and dialed the toll-free number for my bank's National Fraud Division. I bypassed the automated menus with practiced efficiency until a human representative answered. I formally reported the fraudulent charge for the cruise line and the deliberate, structured chain of smaller transfers. The representative tapped on his keyboard. His tone shifted from standard customer service to cautious legal warning. He explained that the pattern of the transactions strongly indicated an internal family account takeover. He warned me that initiating a formal fraud investigation under these specific circumstances would likely trigger an automatic, temporary freeze on all associated accounts for security purposes. This meant any joint accounts connected to my profile, including the one I had deposited 20% of my paycheck into for years to help my parents, would be locked down entirely. The bank would cut off their cash flow without warning. The representative waited for me to back down. He expected the typical familial guilt to kick in, the panic of getting relatives in trouble. I did not flinch. For the first time in my life, my voice was terrifyingly calm. It sounded like cracked ice. I want the legal process, not apologies. Proceed with the immediate freeze. By 10 o'clock, I had left the motel and was sitting in a high-rise office building in downtown Concord. The noise of the city was muffled behind thick, soundproof glass. I sat across a massive mahogany desk from Rena Callahan. Rena was a formidable, razor-sharp attorney who specialized in high-net-worth asset protection. Sitting beside her was an independent financial advisor she had brought in at my request. I did not waste their time with emotional backstories. I laid out my requirements like a military briefing. I needed to claim a 9-figure asset. I required a watertight legal structure, specifically a blind trust managed under the umbrella of a newly formed limited liability company. I wanted absolute, impenetrable anonymity. The public could never know my name, and my family could never trace the funds back to me. Rena took notes with a silver fountain pen, her expression analytical and completely unbothered by the massive sum I had just disclosed. She treated the $100 million as a logistical puzzle rather than a miracle. That was exactly what I needed. As the financial advisor began drafting the preliminary trust structure, Rena pulled up the property records for my current legal address to begin the required compliance checks. I had officially lived in the finished basement of my parents' house for the last 2 years while saving for my townhome. Rena clicked her mouse a few times. The rhythmic clicking stopped abruptly. She leaned closer to her monitor, her brow furrowing. She printed a single document from the machine beside her desk. She picked up the warm sheet of paper, adjusted her wire-rimmed glasses, and looked directly across the desk at me. The professional detachment in her eyes had shifted to something much more serious. "Did you know this house is about to be foreclosed on?" I echoed the words back to her, my voice completely devoid of inflection. "Foreclosed on." Rena slid the freshly printed document across the vast expanse of polished mahogany. I pulled it toward me and read the bold header at the top of the page. Notice of default and intent to foreclose. The property address printed beneath the legal jargon was the exact same house I had just left. The house with the freshly polished hardwood floors, the expensive crab-stuffed mushrooms, and the velvet sofa where my sister held court. According to the county tax assessor records displayed on Rena's monitor, my parents had not paid their municipal property taxes in 3.5 years. The outstanding balance was tens of thousands of dollars. There were also secondary municipal liens attached to the deed for critically overdue winter heating bills. That detail struck me with a sickening irony. Considering how high my father always kept the thermostat to project an image of effortless comfort to his guests, but the most glaring, catastrophic red flag was listed at the very bottom of the page: a massive second mortgage, a high interest, predatory loan taken out against the rapidly dwindling equity of the property. I leaned closer to the document, the harsh overhead light reflecting off the white paper. The origination date for the secondary loan was exactly 14 months ago. I pointed a trembling finger at the borrower section. "My name is listed right here as a co-signer," I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. Rena did not show surprise. She simply clicked her mouse, accessing a deeper layer of the county clerk database. She pulled up the scanned digital image of the original loan contract and magnified the final signature page. There it was, Harper Bennett. The loops and angles of the blue ink cursive were a remarkably good imitation of my handwriting. It was the exact way I signed my name on the rent checks I dutifully handed to my mother on the first of every single month. But the pressure was too heavy. The slant was too rigid and forced. "I never signed this document," I stated clearly, looking directly at the attorney. "I have never seen this paper in my life. They used a durable power of attorney clause," Rena noted, her manicured finger tracing the digital ink on the screen. "Someone filed a notarized document claiming you gave them the absolute legal right to bind you to financial agreements in your absence. This is not just poor financial management. Harper, this is premeditated. Felony identity theft. You need to preserve every single piece of paper, every email, and every text message you have ever received from them. The bank fraud this morning was just the tip of the spear." I pulled my cellular phone from my coat pocket and opened my secure banking application. If they were desperate enough to forge my signature for a secondary mortgage. The narrative of the luxury family vacation did not fit reality. I accessed the detailed routing information for the stolen $18,500. I handed the phone to the independent financial advisor sitting next to Raina and asked him to trace the ultimate destination of the fractional transfers. The merchant name on my statement read as a popular cruise line, but the back-end routing codes told a completely different story. The advisor ran the terminal identification numbers through his proprietary database. The money had not gone to a travel agency or a maritime booking company. The merchant code was a sophisticated pass-through, a digital shell designed to launder the transaction. The funds had been funneled directly into a private, domestic checking account. The registered owner of that receiving account was Spencer Bennett, my older brother. The puzzle pieces locked into place with a deafening, violent crash inside my mind. The baby cruise was nothing but a fresh coat of paint over a rotting, collapsing house. It was a shiny, loud distraction. My parents and Spencer were using Delaney's entitlement and her pregnancy as a convenient smokescreen. They did not need my house down payment to buy holistic ocean energy. They needed it to stave off the wolves. The $18,500 was being sucked into Spencer's account to cover the critically overdue balloon payment on the fraudulent second mortgage. They were desperately trying to keep the house from going to the public auction block by the end of the month. They were drowning in a self-made ocean of debt, and they had happily chained me to their ankles to use as a flotation device. My phone vibrated violently against the wood of the desk. The caller identification displayed Delaney's name. I answered the call and placed the device on the desk, activating the speakerphone. She did not say hello. She did not ask about the massive theft she absolutely knew had occurred from my checking account. She was hysterical, her voice shrill and echoing off the soundproof glass of the office. "What did you do to the accounts?" she shrieked, the sound grating against my exhausted nerves. "I am standing at the premium booking counter and my card was declined in front of everyone. I am trying to secure the prenatal massage package and the system says the funds are completely frozen. You are ruining my entire baby moon." I reached out and pressed the red button, ending the call without speaking a single syllable. 5 seconds later, a text message arrived from my father. The words appeared on the screen, dripping with the exact same arrogant authority he had used my entire life. "Call the bank and tell them it was a system error. Unfreeze the family cards immediately. Are you seriously making a big deal out of internal family matters? Grow up and fix your mistake." I stared at the glowing text. The psychological manipulation was so practiced, so deeply ingrained in their DNA, that they actually believed I would apologize for being robbed. They expected me to fix the disruption I had caused by noticing their theft. I finally understood the terrifying reality of my position. If I softened, if I caved to the decades of conditioned guilt, they would rush back into my life like toxic floodwaters and drown me completely. If I held my ground and protected myself, I would be permanently branded as the ultimate villain. I would be the selfish daughter who abandoned her pregnant sister and her struggling parents in their darkest hour. I accepted the villain role right then and there. It was far better than remaining the victim. I looked up at Rena. The air in the office felt entirely different now. The panic was gone. It felt like a war room. Rena folded her hands neatly on top of the mahogany desk. She looked down at the printed foreclosure notice, then shifted her gaze directly into my eyes. "If you want to truly control the board," she said, her voice perfectly level and devoid of emotion, "you need to control the asset they cling to the most." The silence in Rena's office was heavy, pregnant with a completely different kind of energy than the chaotic desperation I had left behind in Concord. I leaned back against the plush leather chair. I looked at the foreclosure notice spread across the mahogany wood. "I do not want to just pay off the arrears," I said quietly. "If I hand them a blank check, they will simply start digging a brand new hole tomorrow, but I also do not want them dragging this out in bankruptcy court for 5 years. Rena steepled her fingers. "Bankruptcy is a legal shield. If they file Chapter 13, it puts an automatic stay on any foreclosure proceedings. They get to sit in that house, legally protected, while the court restructures a debt they have absolutely no intention of ever paying." "Then we do not foreclose," I replied. The legal chessboard crystallized in my mind. We buy the board. Over the next 2 hours, we built a ghost ship. Raina filed the expedited digital paperwork with the Delaware Department of State to form a brand new corporate entity. We named it Whitehaven Acquisitions Limited Liability Company. The registration utilized a registered agent service and a commercial mail receiving agency located in a completely different time zone. My name, my identity, and my newly acquired 9-figure wealth were buried under layers of impenetrable corporate armor to the outside world. Whitehaven was just another faceless private equity firm acquiring distressed real estate assets, with the corporate shell established. We targeted the most vulnerable point in my parents' crumbling financial fortress, the predatory lender holding the massive second mortgage on the conquered property. These secondary lenders are essentially legal loan sharks, the independent financial advisor explained, pulling up the lender's corporate profile on his laptop. They deal exclusively in high-risk paper. Right now, your parents' note is a non-performing asset. The lender is bleeding money on administrative costs and legal fees just trying to prepare the standard public auction notices. If a cash buyer approaches them right now and offers to purchase the promissory note outright, even at a slight discount, they will almost certainly take the guaranteed cash over the massive headache of a drawn-out legal battle. Offer them 80 cents on the dollar, I instructed. Make it an all-cash. 0 contingency offer. Close the acquisition within 48 hours. Raina smiled. It was the sharp, predatory smile of a lawyer who knew exactly how lethal this specific strategy was. By purchasing the note, Whitehaven Acquisitions would not be paying off my parents' debt on their behalf. Whitehaven would become their new bank. I would literally own the debt they had used my forged signature to secure. And as the primary note holder, I would have the absolute legal authority to dictate the exact terms of their surrender. I wanted a fast, clean exit. If I pushed them into a corner with standard eviction notices, they would fight like feral animals. They would destroy the property, strip the copper wiring from the walls, and tie me up in litigation until the end of the decade. I needed a strategy that bypassed the civil courts entirely. I needed them to walk out the front door voluntarily, fully believing they had somehow outsmarted the system one last time. While the financial advisor began drafting the aggressive acquisition offer for the note, Raina tackled the immediate psychological warfare. She drafted a formal legal notice of representation. It was a cold, brutal document printed on heavy, watermarked firm stationery. It explicitly stated that any and all communication directed at Harper Bennett must be routed directly through her legal counsel. It demanded an immediate cessation of all direct contact, citing ongoing investigations into financial irregularities. This officially severs the emotional pipeline, Raina said, sliding the heavy paper into a thick envelope. They can no longer text you guilt trips. They cannot call you crying if they show up at your motel room. It is legally documented harassment. What if they refuse to negotiate with Whitehaven once we own the debt? I asked, needing a flawless contingency plan. Raina pulled a blank legal petition from her desk drawer. Plan B? If they refuse to play ball, we drop the hammer. We take the forged power of attorney document straight to the district attorney. We file for an emergency protective order freezing every single asset tied to that house. And we initiate a court-ordered, expedited eviction based on criminal fraud. It will not be a messy family civil dispute anymore. It will be criminal prosecution. I nodded. The trap was perfectly set. It was ironclad. My phone, sitting face up on the desk, lit up with a barrage of rapid notifications. The temporary bank freeze had completely set in across all their accounts, and the terrifying reality of their suddenly severed cash flow was sparking absolute panic. Spencer sent a string of furious text messages. The first was demanding, "Fix the accounts right now. Harper." The second was threatening, "I am telling Aunt Tessa and Uncle Bob exactly what kind of selfish thief you are. I will post all over social media that you abandoned your pregnant sister to starve. You are completely dead to this family." I did not type a single letter in response. I simply pressed the side buttons on my phone, capturing high-resolution screenshots of every single threat, and emailed them directly to Rena's secure paralegal inbox. I was just gathering evidence. 2 minutes later, Delaney's face appeared on my screen, via a notification from a popular photo sharing application. She had posted a public, temporary story. It was a heavily filtered, black and white photograph of her resting her hand protectively on her pregnant stomach. Looking tragically out a frosted window, the caption was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive manipulation. It is so heartbreaking when toxic people are desperately jealous of a mother's glowing happiness, trying to stay strong for my baby, despite the ultimate family betrayal. She added a broken heart emoji and a praying hands emoji in the past. That specific post would have sent me into an immediate spiral of anxiety. I would have drafted a dozen desperate apologies. I would have transferred the last $200 in my checking account just to make the digital whispering stop. Now, looking at her manufactured victimhood, I felt absolutely nothing. The emotional manipulations simply bounced off the cold, hard reality of the legal armor I was currently wearing. I turned my phone completely off and slid it back into my heavy winter coat pocket. They are starting to panic, I told Rena, watching the snow begin to fall heavier outside the towering office window. They think they can shame me into opening the vault back up. They have no idea the entire bank has already relocated. Rena reviewed the final draft of the corporate formation documents. Once the note acquisition clears, we hold all the cards. But you have to remember, Harper, people like this do not surrender simply because they are beaten. They only surrender when they think they are getting a prize. I looked at the forged signature on the secondary mortgage document one last time. The anger was entirely gone, replaced by a crystalline, absolute clarity. I knew exactly how to get them out of that house without a single fight. I knew exactly what kind of bait their bottomless greed could not resist. I looked up at my attorney. I will throw them a life preserver, I told her, but this one requires a signature. The trap needed to be lined with sugar. For 20 years. I had survived my family by perfecting the art of the apology. I knew exactly how to lower my gaze, soften my voice, and absorb their blame so they could feel powerful. Now, I was going to use that exact same defense mechanism as an offensive weapon. Sitting in the quiet luxury of Rena's conference room, I opened my laptop and drafted a new message to the family group email thread. I did not use my newly secured, encrypted address. I used the old one, the one they expected, to maintain the illusion of continuity. I took a deep breath, channeled every ounce of the pathetic, subservient daughter they had molded, and began to type. I am so sorry for overreacting yesterday. I wrote. The words felt like bile in my throat, but I forced my fingers to keep moving. I was just panicked about the house deposit, but I understand now that family emergencies have to come first. I should not have caused a scene. Then came the meticulously crafted lie. I could not let them know about the lottery ticket, but I needed to explain how I was suddenly able to orchestrate a real estate bailout. I have some news. I continued. I did not want to say anything until the ink was dry, but I recently received a massive, lump sum payout. Do you remember when I tore my rotator cuff working in the warehouse at Apex Global Logistics 3 years ago? The workers' compensation lawsuit finally settled out of court this week. Combined with my executive operations bonus from Blackridge, I have access to a significant amount of liquid capital. It was a flawless fabrication. It sounded exactly like the kind of grueling, painful grind I was known for, yielding a moderate but substantial payout. It was completely believable. I know about the foreclosure notices. I typed, dropping the first real weight onto the digital scales. I know the public auction is looming. I want to save the family from the absolute humiliation of being dragged out onto the lawn by the county sheriff in front of the entire neighborhood. I have partnered with a private equity group called Whitehaven Acquisitions. They are willing to buy the distressed debt and purchase the property directly, satisfying the predatory loan completely. Now, the hook, because I am facilitating the deal. I negotiated a comprehensive relocation package for you and Dad. Whitehaven will cover the upfront costs for a premium short-term rental for 6 months, plus professional packing and climate-controlled storage for all the furniture. But there is a strict condition. Whitehaven is operating on an aggressive corporate fiscal quarter deadline. The property must be legally handed over, completely vacant, by 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Everyone must sign a voluntary surrender of possession agreement at my attorney's office to trigger the release of the relocation funds. I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I needed to neutralize Delaney. She was the wild card, the one who could throw a tantrum and derail the timeline just for the attention. I added a final paragraph, specifically for her, Delaney. I know the frozen accounts ruined your cruise deposit. I am so incredibly sorry for the stress this caused the baby. Once Mom and Dad are safely relocated and the house is settled, I am going to personally book and pay for an exclusive 5-star postpartum recovery retreat for you. You deserve to be pampered. I hit send. The tension in my chest was a coiled spring. I sat in the silent office and watched the digital clock on my computer screen tick forward. 5 minutes passed, then 10. I knew exactly what was happening in Concord. They were reading the email, their initial outrage immediately eclipsed by the intoxicating scent of fresh money. They were calculating how much of my fictitious settlement they could eventually drain. My phone vibrated. A reply from Gordon. "It is about time you stepped up." His email read, "No greeting, no acknowledgement of my supposed apology. Finally, you are being reasonable and thinking about the family instead of just yourself. Have your people send the details. We will be there." He took the bait whole, swallowing the hook, the line, and the sinker. He actually believed his harsh text message from earlier had successfully bullied me into submission. He thought he had won. A moment later, my cell phone screen illuminated with an incoming call. It was Marilyn. I did not answer immediately. I opened the voice memo application on my laptop, positioned my phone near the microphone, and hit the red record button. Then, I accepted the call on speakerphone. "Harper, my sweet girl," my mother's voice crooned. It was a sickeningly sweet, syrupy tone that she reserved exclusively for moments when she was about to ask for money or when she thought she had successfully manipulated a situation. The hostility from the night before had vanished entirely, replaced by a fabricated maternal warmth that made my skin crawl. "Hi, Mom," I said softly, injecting just the right amount of trembling relief into my voice. "I knew you loved me," she cooed, the sound echoing in the sterile conference room. "I told your father," I said, "our Harper would never abandon us. She knows how much we sacrificed for her. This Whitehaven group, they are going to pay for a nice rental? Because I simply cannot be expected to move into some cramped apartment. I need space to entertain when the baby comes. They are covering a premium executive rental." "Mom," I assured her, staring dead-eyed at the recording waveform bouncing on my screen. "You just have to come to the law office on Friday to sign the transition paperwork. Whitehaven needs the property fully vacated by Friday evening to release the funds." "Of course, darling," she said smoothly. "It is just paperwork. We will get it sorted out. You are such a good daughter for fixing this mess. We will see you on Friday." She ended the call. She did not ask how my shoulder was doing after the fake injury. She did not apologize for stealing $18,500. She only cared that the checkbook was open again. I stopped the recording and saved the audio file directly into the secure legal drive we had established. I looked up. Rena Callahan walked back into the conference room. The soft click of the heavy door sealing shut behind her sounded like a vault locking. She was carrying a thick stack of documents bound with a dark blue legal cover. She moved with the predatory grace of a shark that had just smelled blood in the water. She walked to the opposite side of the mahogany table and placed the heavy stack of papers squarely in front of me. The crisp white pages stood out sharply against the dark wood. She tapped the top of the stack with her manicured index finger. Her eyes were completely devoid of warmth. "The trap is set," Rena said, her voice dropping to a low, commanding register. "This is what they will sign to walk out of the house themselves, right out into the snow." The conference room on the top floor of the downtown Concord legal building felt like a glass cage suspended in a blizzard. Thick, heavy flakes of snow hurled themselves against the floor-to-ceiling windows, coating the city in a blinding white sheet. Inside, the temperature was perfectly regulated, but the air was entirely devoid of warmth. I sat rigidly in an ergonomic leather chair, watching the heavy oak door, right on time. They made their grand entrance. They did not walk into the law firm like a family on the brink of absolute financial ruin. They strutted in like lottery winners arriving to collect a giant cardboard check. Spencer led the charge. He was wearing a tailored wool coat that I knew for a fact he could not afford. He let out a low whistle, his eyes roaming over the original abstract art and the massive marble conference table. "Nice setup you bought yourself with that settlement money, little sister," he joked, a smirk playing on his lips as he aggressively tossed his scarf over an empty chair. Gordon followed, his chest puffed out. He immediately zeroed in on Rena Callahan, who was standing perfectly straight at the head of the table. He extended his hand with the practiced, booming confidence of a man who believed he was the smartest person in any room, Gordon Bennett. He announced, "Glad we could finally get some competent professionals to sort out this paperwork." Rena did not shake his hand. She simply offered a curt, razor-thin nod and gestured toward the arranged seating. "Please, sit down. We have a rigid schedule to adhere to." Marilyn ignored the tension completely. She practically glided across the room and wrapped her arms around my shoulders in a suffocating embrace. Her heavy floral perfume masked the scent of the betrayal from 2 days ago. "Oh, my brilliant girl," she whispered loudly, squeezing me tight as if I had not just caught her spying on my bank accounts. "I told everyone you would pull through for us." I sat perfectly still, letting her play her part. I did not return the hug. Once they were seated, Rena took absolute control of the room. She did not offer them coffee or water. She simply unclasped a thick leather portfolio and began distributing the stacks of documents. Each stack was meticulously tabbed with brightly colored sticky notes, indicating where signatures were required. "Let us be entirely clear about the mechanics of this transaction," Rena began, her voice slicing through the room like a scalpel. "Whitehaven Acquisitions is fully absorbing the outstanding debt on the property. In exchange, you are executing a deed in lieu of foreclosure. This officially transfers the title of the property directly to the corporate entity." Gordon waved his hand impatiently, barely glancing at the dense legal paragraphs. Yes, we understand the real estate jargon. Where is the breakdown for the relocation package? The short-term rental funds? That is what we are here to finalize so we can get the movers paid." They did not read a single line of the actual contracts. Their eyes frantically scanned the pages, hunting only for the dollar signs. They were entirely blinded by their own bottomless greed. "Before we get to the disbursement schedule," I interrupted, my voice calm and completely flat. I slid a separate, single-page document across the polished marble directly toward Spencer. "There is a minor tax compliance issue we need to clear up regarding the $18,500 that was transferred into your personal account earlier this week." Spencer stiffened slightly, his eyes darting toward our father. "Whitehaven's corporate accountants flagged the transfer." I lied smoothly, not breaking eye contact with my brother. "If we leave it unaccounted for, the IRS will classify it as an unearned gift, which triggers a massive audit penalty for the new trust. To bypass that, we just need you to sign this form legally classifying that specific amount as a consulting fee for property management advice you provided to me." Spencer's initial panic instantly dissolved, replaced by his overwhelming, arrogant pride. He saw an opportunity to legitimize his theft and stroke his ego simultaneously. He pulled a silver pen from his pocket. "A consulting fee," he repeated, puffing his chest out again. "Well, I did give you a lot of crucial advice on how to handle the contractors. My time is incredibly valuable. It makes perfect sense to put it on the books." He signed his name with a flourish. He even added the current date. He handed the paper back to me with a smug grin. He had absolutely no idea he had just officially, legally documented his receipt of the stolen funds and provided a written, signed confession of financial fraud to my attorney. I slid the paper into my secure folder. Rena immediately shifted the focus to Gordon. She tapped a specific clause in the thickest document. "This is the surrender of possession agreement. Whitehaven requires the property to be entirely vacant, swept clean, and the keys surrendered by exactly 5 o'clock this evening." Gordon scoffed, grabbing the pen. "The moving trucks are loading the last of the boxes right now. We will be out of that dump by 3 o'clock. We are heading straight to the executive suites you booked." He signed on the dotted line without reading the bold print directly beneath his signature. The clause he just blindly agreed to explicitly stated that if the premises were not vacated by the agreed-upon hour, Whitehaven possessed the irrevocable right to execute an immediate, emergency writ of possession without any further notice or court hearings. He had just handed us the loaded gun and explicitly given us the legal permission to pull the trigger. Finally, Rena slid a thin addendum toward my mother. Marilyn picked it up, her brow furrowing slightly at the dense legal phrasing. "What is this one for?" she asked, her fake sweet tone slipping just a fraction. Rena did not miss a beat. "That is the waiver of stay. It is an expedited processing addendum. It waives the standard 30-day municipal holding period, allowing Whitehaven to release your relocation funds immediately upon the surrender of the keys this afternoon." Marilyn's eyes lit up at the word immediately. "Oh, wonderful. Anything to speed up the process. We have reservations for dinner tonight to celebrate." She practically snatched the pen from Gordon and scrawled her looping cursive across the bottom of the page. She thought she was signing a fast-track ticket to a luxury hotel. She had actually just legally and permanently waived her right to contest an eviction or beg a judge for an extension. Rena gathered the documents one by one. She checked every signature, every date, and every initial. Her face remained a perfect, unreadable mask of professional detachment. She stacked the papers perfectly, tapped the edges against the marble table to align them, and slipped them back into the heavy leather portfolio. The sharp click of the metal clasp echoing in the room was the loudest sound I had heard all week. Gordon stood up, buttoning his heavy coat. "Pleasure doing business," he said, his voice oozing with unearned triumph. "We will text you when the keys are on the kitchen counter. Make sure the funds are wired by 5 o'clock sharp." They turned and walked out of the conference room, chatting excitedly about the dinner reservations they had made. They did not look back at me once. I remained in the leather chair, staring at the empty doorway. The heavy silence of the law firm rushed back in to fill the space they had left behind. I listened to the faint ding of the elevator bell down the hallway. I looked out the massive window at the swirling, violent snowstorm engulfing the streets of Concord. Done. Now all that is left is waiting for them to walk outside. The marble floors of the Grand Heritage Hotel squeaked under the heavy wheels of 4 oversized designer suitcases. Gordon marched up to the mahogany front desk with the supreme confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. He slammed his driver's license onto the polished stone and demanded the keys for the executive suites reserved under Whitehaven Acquisitions. The concierge, a young man in a crisp uniform, typed rapidly on his keyboard. A frown creased his forehead. "I apologize, sir," the concierge said politely. "We had a preliminary booking request, but the reservation was automatically canceled 2 hours ago. The payment method provided for the mandatory security deposit was completely declined. Your bank cited an active fraud freeze." Gordon's face flushed a deep, angry purple. "Swipe my personal card," he barked, pulling a gold credit card from his wallet. "I will cover the deposit myself and bill the corporate office later." The concierge swiped the card. A sharp beep echoed. "Declined, sir." Gordon threw down another card. Another beep. "Declined." Delaney, wrapped in a massive faux fur coat, pushed her way to the front of the desk. "Do you have any idea who we are?" she shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceilings and drawing stares from other guests in the lobby. "I am 5 months pregnant. I need to lie down immediately. Give us our room." The concierge took a step back but maintained his professional composure. "I am terribly sorry, ma'am, but we have no valid transaction on file. I cannot issue key cards without a cleared security deposit." Spencer pulled out his phone, his hands suddenly shaking. He opened his banking application, fully expecting to see the massive relocation payout from the signed agreements. The screen loaded slowly. The balance was exactly where it had been that morning. Frozen. 0 available funds. He frantically scrolled through the digital copies of the contracts Rena had emailed them. His eyes widened as he finally read the fine print under the relocation disbursement schedule. "The funds are not released," Spencer stammered. his voice cracking. "It says right here. Disbursement occurs only after a comprehensive physical inventory by Whitehaven inspectors. Post-surrender of the premises." Gordon snatched the phone from Spencer's hand. Reading the clause, the color completely drained from his face. They had left the house at 3 o'clock. They had tossed the keys on the kitchen counter just like the agreement stated. "Get back to the cars," Gordon ordered, his voice suddenly hollow. The drive back to the conquered neighborhood was a chaotic, reckless blur through the intensifying blizzard. They pulled into the driveway just as the sun began to set, casting long, dark shadows across the snow-covered lawn. Gordon leaped from the driver's seat and sprinted up the front steps. He grabbed the brass handle of the heavy oak door and shoved. It did not budge. He pulled his spare key from his coat pocket and jammed it into the cylinder. It slid in halfway and stopped entirely. The internal pins were completely different. The locks had already been changed. The heavy deadbolt was brand new. Gleaming under the porch light, Marilyn pushed past him, her fists pounding frantically against the solid wood. The hollow thud echoed in the freezing air. She pulled out her cell phone and dialed my number. Sitting in the heated passenger seat of Rena's luxury sedan, parked discreetly down the street, I watched the entire scene unfold. My phone vibrated in the cup holder. I let it ring. A moment later, a voice message appeared. I pressed play. Marilyn's voice filled the car, instantly shifting from the demanding matriarch to the ultimate, helpless victim. "Harper, what is going on? The door is locked. Are you seriously going to let your own parents freeze to death out here? Call me back right now." I did not call her back. I opened the family group chat. I typed a single, definitive sentence. "All communication must go through my legal counsel. Any further attempt to enter or breach the property will be treated as criminal trespassing." I hit send and watched the read receipts pop up almost instantly. Gordon, consumed by a blind, entitled rage, dialed the emergency dispatch line. 10 minutes later, a county sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop at the curb. Its blue and red lights cutting through the heavy snowfall. A deputy stepped out, his boots crunching on the icy pavement. Gordon immediately launched into a furious tirade about illegal evictions and stolen property. The deputy held up a gloved hand, silencing him. He pulled a waterproof tablet from his utility belt. "I received a direct digital dispatch from the district attorney's office 20 minutes ago regarding this specific address. Mr. Bennett." The deputy pulled up a high-resolution scan of the documents they had signed just hours earlier. "I am looking at a voluntary surrender of possession agreement. It bears your exact signature, dated today. I am also looking at a waiver of stay, signed by your wife, voluntarily relinquishing any legal right to a grace period. She tricked us," Delaney wailed, clutching her coat around her stomach. The deputy shook his head slowly. "You signed legally binding corporate contracts in the presence of an attorney. You voluntarily surrendered this property. You gave up your right to stay. If you attempt to force entry into this house, or if you refuse to vacate the perimeter, I will arrest you all for trespassing on corporate property." Spencer staggered backward, leaning heavily against the frozen brick facade of the house. His breath came in ragged, panicked gasps. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked down at his shaking hands. The consulting fee. He had signed a legally binding tax document confessing that the $18,500 sitting frozen in his bank account was personal income. Income he had accepted directly from an account that was now under federal investigation for identity theft and fraud. If he tried to fight the lockout, the police would look into the bank freeze. They would see the forged signature on the mortgage. They would see his signed confession. He had hammered the final nail into his own coffin. From the warm interior of the sedan, I watched my family stand shivering in the driveway of a house they no longer owned, locked out by their own signatures, with no money and nowhere to go. The snow swirled around them, indifferent to their sudden, catastrophic downfall. Rena leaned over from the driver's seat. The dashboard lights illuminated her sharp, calculating features. She looked at the pathetic scene playing out in the blizzard, then turned her gaze to me. "Tomorrow, we secure the official writ of possession," Rena whispered, her voice a low, triumphant hum over the sound of the heater. And the day after that, the snow will be our witness. The New Hampshire blizzard hit with apocalyptic fury overnight. By mid-morning, the temperature had plummeted to single digits, and the relentless wind whipped the snow into a blinding white curtain, effectively erasing the streets and any trace of the past. I stood in the heavy snowfall, my boots sinking into the fresh powder, watching the county sheriff's cruisers block the driveway. The official writ of possession had been signed by a judge at 8 o'clock that morning. The legal machinery was fully in motion, and it possessed absolutely no capacity for pity. Gordon and Marilyn stood on the porch, desperately trying to perform a tragic theatrical production for the armed deputies. My mother was weeping loudly, clutching her chest, asking how officers of the law could throw a respectable older couple out into a freezing storm. My father was pointing fingers, demanding to speak to a supervisor, claiming there had been a massive clerical error. The lead sheriff did not flinch. He simply tapped the thick stack of court orders attached to his clipboard. The paperwork did not care about their performance. It only cared about the ink they had voluntarily applied to the surrender agreements 24 hours prior. Delaney waddled down the front steps, her face streaked with mascara. She locked eyes with me, her expression twisting into a mask of pure venom. "I am carrying your niece or nephew," she screamed over the howling wind. "How can you be this evil? I need a warm place to sleep." I did not engage. I did not hurl insults or list the decades of abuse I had endured. I remained entirely silent, standing a deliberate 3 paces behind Rena Callahan. I held my boundaries like a fortress wall. Spencer finally snapped. He lunged forward, his face contorted in blind rage, screaming that I was a demon and a sociopath who had planned to destroy them all along. Before he could take a third step, the sheriff stepped squarely into his path, placing a heavy gloved hand onto Spencer's chest. "Back up right now," the sheriff commanded, his voice easily cutting through the roar of the blizzard. "You have been legally ordered to vacate the premises. Any physical aggression or refusal to comply will result in your immediate arrest for criminal trespass and assault. Do you understand me?" Spencer froze, the reality of the handcuffs finally piercing his arrogance. He retreated, his shoulders slumping. They were permitted to carry out only their immediate personal belongings: clothes, toiletries, and basic necessities. Everything else, the velvet sofa, the expensive dining table, the flat-screen televisions, remained inside. As soon as the last designer suitcase was dragged across the threshold, a deputy pulled the heavy oak door shut. The metallic click of the new deadbolt echoed like a gunshot. A bright orange legal notice was slapped across the wood, officially sealing the property. There was no property damage. There was no violence. There was only the quiet, crushing weight of absolute consequences. They stood huddled together on the frozen sidewalk, shivering in the biting cold. It was the exact spot where they had always made me feel small, the house they had used as leverage to keep my head bowed and my bank account drained. I stepped out from behind my attorney and walked slowly toward them. The wind bit at my cheeks, but I felt entirely warm inside. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a thick, white envelope. I extended my arm, offering it to my father. Gordon snatched it, his hands shaking violently from the cold and the shock. He tore the top open, expecting a check or a last-minute reprieve. He pulled out 3 pieces of paper. The first was a prepaid voucher for a cheap motel located on the edge of town, valid for exactly 3 nights. The second was a printed directory of local social services, public defenders, and emergency food banks. "I am not doing this because I feel sorry for you," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I am doing this because I refuse to ever become like you. You have exactly 3 days of warmth to figure out how to survive without me." Gordon pulled out the third piece of paper. His eyes scanned the text, his jaw dropping in absolute horror. It was a certified copy of the property deed. It showed that Whitehaven Acquisitions had officially transferred the title of the house to a newly formed, non-profit entity named Hearthlight Transitional Housing. "I am turning this property into a temporary shelter for people experiencing severe financial crises," I explained. watching the color completely drain from their faces. It will be a safe haven for people who actually need help to get back on their feet. And as of this morning, you are the very first people to transition out. I turned my back on them and walked toward my car. I did not look over my shoulder. I climbed into the driver's seat, pulled my phone from the center console, and permanently blocked every single contact associated with the Bennett family. I deleted the group chat. I initiated a number change request through my cellular provider. I shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the curb. The tires gripped the snowy asphalt perfectly, for the very first time in my entire life. I looked into the rearview mirror and I did not see the heavy, suffocating ghost of my fabricated debt sitting in the back seat. I was entirely free. I watched the snow falling rapidly, blanketing the city in a clean, pristine white. They gave me a $2 ticket to remind me I was small. I used $100 million to remind them that signing a paper is also a kind of truth. Thank you so much for listening to this story until the very end. Please leave a comment down below letting me know where you are listening from so we can connect and share our thoughts together. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Like this video, and support the channel even more by clicking the hype button so this story can be heard by many more people.